Yeah, so now is that playing with the idea that Shedeur is starting, or is that with Deshaun? Because I've had a hard time, Emory, playing the schedule game because I think highly of Shedeur, and I just don't think highly of Deshaun at this point.
For me, it's with Shedeur starting. And I will say this, it's always fascinating how and I'm not talking about you guys, I'm talking about the people that are on my side of things that kind of pontificate and talk, how disingenuous many people are and how they're looking at this Shedeur thing.
The Cleveland Browns traded away the best defensive player of his generation, and one of the most respected football analysts in the country just looked at their schedule, game by game, and still said 10 wins. Here's the strange part. The guy that most of the national media spent the entire spring propping up as the starter, he hasn't been able to throw a football deep down the field in over 2 years. And the people backing him aren't doing it because of what they've seen. They're doing it because of what they're afraid to admit. By the time we get to the end of this, you're going to understand exactly what is happening inside that building in Berea. The reps, the body language, the one thing that Emory Hunt said that the entire NFL media walked right past. And when you hear it, it's going to make the whole offseason make sense.
Played good football, solid football with, considering the situation, and now you have better offensive weaponry around him. He has a stable offseason. And for Deshaun Watson, I just want to see him get back to that fluid throwing motion that we used to see from him in Houston. I said this was maybe the 2023 season or 2024 season when they played the Cowboys, and it was evident in that game he couldn't push the ball deep down the field. And it was frustrating because when you watch him in Houston, he legit threw the football like Warren Moon.
There's a moment that tells you everything about what this franchise has been carrying. It's not the losing. Every bad team loses. It's the specific way Cleveland lost, with their quarterback physically unable to do what quarterbacks are supposed to do. Think about the Cowboys game. Not the score, not the stats, the throw, or the absence of one. Deshaun Watson standing in the pocket, looking downfield, and the ball going nowhere it was supposed to go. Short, forced, flat. And anyone who watched him in Houston, who saw that smooth, long release, the deep ball that traveled like Warren Moon used to throw it, they knew exactly what they were watching. They were watching a man trying to be someone he used to be. That's the wound, not the injury itself. The injury healed, technically. The wound is the 6 years between who Deshaun Watson was and who he is now. And Emory Hunt said it directly. Watson himself has acknowledged he is not the same player. 6 years removed, and we still don't know what this version looks like. The outside world processed that moment as a depth chart question, a roster management problem. It was never that. It was a franchise looking at its future and realizing that the safest bet on the field might be a 5th-round pick most of the league didn't believe in. That's what brought us here.
So we don't know what this version of Deshaun Watson looks like, but I do feel like at worst he gives you a solid veteran backup right now. But Shedeur Sanders is the ascending talent, and you want to maximize that with how well he finished last year, just opposed to what you built around him.
Emory, I think it's interesting. If we let's take the quarterback out of it. Let's say we plug in league average quarterback play. So whatever you think the 16th to 17th best quarterback in the NFL can give you, let's say we get that out of the quarterback spot.
Start with what you can actually see. The rep distribution at mandatory minicamp just ended, and Taylon Green, the 3rd quarterback on the depth chart, barely got reps. Think about what that tells you. Organizations don't freeze out developmental quarterbacks without a reason. If this was a 3-man genuine competition, Taylon Green would be getting meaningful work. He's not, which means the real conversation has already narrowed to 2, and the quiet lean, is becoming visible. Now watch where the praise is coming from, not from the national guys who spent April saying Deshaun was clearly ahead. Watch what the people who actually study the tape are saying. Emory Hunt has been in Shedeur Sanders' corner for years, not because of draft position, not because of hype, because of what he saw on the field. A guy who went 3-4 as a starter in circumstances that would have broken lesser players, in a system that gave him almost nothing and nearly won 5 games. Most first-rounders with better support don't do that. Here's what Emory said that nobody amplified enough. He said that if Shedeur Sanders had been drafted in the first round, people would be talking about his 3-4 finish the way they talk about rising stars. They'd be calling it impressive given the circumstances. Instead, because he went in the 5th, the same performance becomes evidence of doubt. The same numbers, the same film, completely reframed because of when his name got called on draft night. That's not analysis, that's bias with a microphone. The Browns didn't just add Shedeur, they built around him.
I was surprised at the lack of, layered questions. Because somebody said, well, Deshaun's out in front. Okay, explain how. And he never asked that question. Because if you just ask one more question, you see their house of cards fall apart. So it goes back to my initial argument. A lot of people was being disingenuous. They didn't like Deshaun Watson, but they don't like Shedeur Sanders more. They love the idea.
Isaiah Bond, Jerry Jeudy, Casey Concepcion, Harold Fan, and then the crown, Denzel Boston in the draft. A receiver who, according to Emory, can win above the rim, win short, win intermediate, win deep. The kind of player Cleveland did not have last year. The kind of player you build around a young quarterback who needs reliable weapons to grow into. You don't construct that receiving room for a veteran bridge quarterback playing on borrowed time. You construct it for the future. Last year's Cleveland offense was statistically one of the 3 worst in the NFL in most major categories. That's the floor. The direction of every decision this offseason has been away from that floor. New weapons, upgraded offensive line depth, a stable offseason for a young quarterback learning an offense. Emory's point isn't that 10 wins is guaranteed. His point is that you don't need a transcendent quarterback to get there. You need league average, 16th best. And if Shedeur Sanders is even that, on a better roster, with a real offseason, with weapons that can actually win contested catches, the math works. When was the last time you saw a franchise add a brand new receiver core, upgrade the offensive line depth, and keep talking about competition at quarterback for a guy they gave a fully guaranteed contract to who hasn't thrown a deep ball in 2 years? That's not a competition. That's a public relations posture while an organizational decision finishes being made. Let's talk about what is actually happening inside the minds of the people in this situation, because this is never just football.
And say, oh, he's catching up. They're saying he's catching up because they don't want to say, yo, I was completely wrong and false when I put out that statement earlier in the minicamp all OTA circuit. So I still feel like Shedeur is a leader. Deshaun has to show that he can do this in games, just showing from where he is from a health perspective and in a mental space. And I'm rooting for him because, again, we're talking about a guy that was on a Hall of Fame track before 20.
First, identity threat. Deshaun Watson. Here's a man who was on a Hall of Fame track before 2021. That's not hyperbole. That's documented. And now, 6 years later, he's competing with a 5th-round rookie for a starting job. His entire self-concept, everything he built, everything he sacrificed, was built around being an elite quarterback. What does it do to a man's body to show up to a facility every day, knowing that the ceiling for his role is at best solid veteran backup? His mechanics will tell you the answer before his words do. The smoothness comes and goes. The release that used to look like Warren Moon now looks cautious. Not because the body can't, but because identity threat lives in the nervous system before it reaches the muscle. Second, perceived locus of control. Now look at Shedeur Sanders through the same lens. He watched the draft happen. He watched himself fall. He knows what the NFL thought of him before he ever took a snap. And Emory Hunt said it plainly. Jared Verse is about to ball out in Cleveland because being traded for Myles Garrett lit something in him. That same psychology is working on Shedeur. You want someone playing with something to prove. You want someone who has been told they aren't enough, because those players play like they will not stop until you see it. The locus of control is internal. He believes the outcome depends on him. Watch the words coaches use, not what they say, what they avoid saying. Nobody is calling this Deshaun Watson's team. Nobody is using the language of commitment around him. The hedging is institutional. Organizations that are truly committed to a quarterback talk like it. They don't create space for the word competition. When the language is careful, the decision isn't final, or the final decision is one they're not ready to say out loud. Think about it from Shedeur Sanders' point of view for a second. You go into an offseason after proving you can win football games with nothing around you. Now they've given you Denzel Boston. They've given you Isaiah Bond, who is apparently wide open on every single snap of camp. They've given you a stable system in real practice time. They've given you everything you didn't have, and you're being told it's still a competition? That's not discouraging to a player like him. That's fuel. Here is how you read what Cleveland is actually doing. Step 1. The receiver room. They didn't build it for Deshaun Watson's twilight. They built it for a quarterback who needs to grow. Denzel Boston was selected specifically because he addresses the one thing Cleveland has been missing, a guy who can win those 50-50 balls that change field position, change momentum, and change how a defense has to play you. You draft that player for the quarterback you believe in.
Step 2. The rep distribution. It narrowed. Green is barely being seen. The reps between Sanders and Watson are tightening, and the direction they're moving has a lean. Emory said it. Shedeur has caught up. Some people are saying he's passed. The people saying that aren't the ones who wanted Watson to succeed. They're the ones who've been watching. Step 3. The language around Watson. It is careful, clinical, supportive in the way you are supportive of someone you want to land softly. When Emory says, at worst, he gives you a solid veteran backup, that's not a knock coming from Emory. That's him translating what the organization is signaling in their press conference cadence. Step 4. What Emory called disingenuous. This is the tell. The people who spent the early part of the offseason loudly putting Watson out in front were never Watson believers. They were Shedeur doubters. There's a difference, and when you don't separate those two things, you get a false narrative that runs for weeks until the actual practice reps start contradicting it. Then the same people quietly say, he's catching up, instead of, I was wrong. Organizations don't make accidents that cost them money, and the accident they're not making is investing a full offseason of resources into building around a quarterback they don't believe is the future. But to understand why this matters, we have to go back to the moment Shedeur Sanders first stepped on an NFL field. It was a Ravens game. Chaos situation. Shedeur comes in cold. He throws a pass to Gage Lorraine in the end zone, a beautifully placed ball that could have tied the game. Lorraine doesn't make the catch. That play, that one play, is exactly the moment Emory uses to explain Denzel Boston's value. Because if Boston is in that lineup instead of Lorraine, he makes that catch. That's not a hypothetical about a better Cleveland offense. That's a specific moment that already happened, where the margin between winning and losing was one contested reception. That's the team they're building now, and Shedeur is the quarterback they're building it for.
There are 53 men watching this play out. Most of them already know how it ends. Locker rooms always do. Players read the reps. They read the energy around a quarterback during 7-on-7. They see who the young guys look to when they make a great catch. They see who the coaches talk to after a drive. Nobody needs a press conference to tell them what they already feel. The question is not who the starter is. The question is whether the locker room chemistry, the trust, the belief in the system, the willingness to block and run and compete for a quarterback is already forming around the right person. Because chemistry doesn't rebuild between week 1 and week 2. It starts in May. Emory Hunt's 10-win projection isn't a fantasy, it's a structure. The AFC North is going to be the most competitive division in football. The Ravens are built, the Bengals have their window, even the Steelers got Aaron Rodgers back. 10 wins might mean third place. Third place might mean the 7th seed. The 7th seed is the playoffs, and in the playoffs, anything happens. But none of that matters if the quarterback situation creates chaos instead of clarity. 10 wins is achievable if Shedeur Sanders gets the job, keeps the job, and is allowed to build through the early weeks without the distraction of a competition that the organization has already, quietly, settled in their minds. The clock on that clarity is ticking. 3 years from now, one of two stories gets told. The first story, Cleveland gave a fifth-round quarterback every resource they had, built a genuine receiving corps, put Jared Verse next to him on defense, and watched him become the most underrated development story in the NFL. And people look back at this offseason and say, it was obvious, the evidence was all there. The second story, Cleveland hedged. They talked about competition when they should have committed. They took too long to settle the question, and by week 4, with the offense still finding itself, with Watson and Sanders splitting reps into the summer, they robbed the kid of the runway he needed to actually take flight. Emory Hunt is betting on the first story. The organizational signals are starting to point that way too. We open by saying that Emory Hunt played the schedule game, no Myles Garrett, and still landed at 10 wins. Now you know why. It was never about whether Cleveland could survive losing the best defensive player of his era. It was about whether they had the clarity at quarterback, at receiver, in their own organizational psychology to become something different, something new. And the evidence says they might. Because at the bottom of all of this, underneath the depth charts and the rep counts and the press conference non-answers, there's a kid who fell in the 5th round of the NFL draft, who was told in the most public way possible that he wasn't worth picking early, who showed up to a minicamp in Cleveland with every analyst in the country already writing their own version of his ceiling, and he's been throwing footballs in an empty field and running routes with receivers who are starting to believe in him, and slowly, quietly, making the kind of argument that doesn't need a podium. The argument you make by just being undeniable. Every franchise eventually has to decide if they believe in who they've built around. Cleveland is at that moment right now. So here's what I need to know from you. Is Shedeur Sanders already the unquestioned starter in that building and Cleveland is just giving Deshaun Watson a respectful exit ramp? Or is this still genuinely open and the risk of getting it wrong could cost them the exact window that Emory Hunt just mapped out for them? Drop it below. I'll be in the comments.